Good evening, everybody. Hello, welcome, and thank you very much for joining us this evening on this special World Oceans Day webinar with Dr. Mark Norman and some special guests celebrating the weird and wonderful life of Victoria's Marine National Park system. Each year, World Oceans Day, June the 8th, provides people around the world with a special opportunity to celebrate and honour our one shared ocean, something that connects us all. This year's theme for World Oceans Day is the 30 by 30 goal of protecting 30% of the world's oceans and terrestrial environments by 2030, and it's very, very relevant to tonight's presentation. My name's Mark Rodrigue. I'm the Program Leader for Marine and Coasts at Parks Victoria, and it's my absolute pleasure to be hosting this webinar this evening. Before we begin tonight's webinar, however, I'd like to pay my respects and acknowledge the Victoria's traditional owners and their elders past, present and emerging across Victoria, wherever you might be. In my own case, I'm speaking to you tonight from Wadawurrung country down here in Barwon Heads. Tonight's meeting, session webinar, we're going to be using the Microsoft Teams format. And if you're not familiar with it, there's a couple of things that you might want to be aware of. Firstly, just to try and keep the webinar running smoothly, we've turned off your cameras and your microphones, so we won't be able to see or hear you. But when I've finished doing my introduction, I am going to turn the chat on, providing you a chance to ask questions or make comments on things that are being said throughout the presentation. And depending upon how much time we have towards the end, we'll try and get to some of the best questions. I can't promise we'll answer all of them, but we'll certainly do our best to get back to those ones that we aren't able to address tonight. Tonight's webinar is part of a series of events that's happening throughout this year, a special year, I hope, for all Victorians as we approach the 20th anniversary of Victoria's marine national parks and marine sanctuaries. Nearly 20 years ago, a new era of ocean conservation was born by creating a system of marine national parks and marine sanctuaries here in Victoria. They were established on the 16th of November, creating the world's first system, a representative marine protected area system, through a single piece of legislation. This achievement was the culmination of more than 10 years' work by many community organisations, individuals, scientists, researchers to establish a protected area system for the sea, protecting our state's unique and diverse marine habitats and the many species, many of which some of which you'll get to meet tonight, that depend upon them, and complementing our fantastic national park system on our land. Today's webinar will be a chance for you to go for a virtual dive and meet some of the amazing creatures that call Victoria's sometimes chilly waters home. I'd like to take a moment before we start and provide a little background and introduce you to both our keynote presenter tonight and his guests that are going to be taking on this journey across underwater discovery journey this evening. First of all, it's my great pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, Parks Victoria's Chief Conservation Scientist, Dr. Mark Norman. Mark joined Parks Victoria back in 2016 and is responsible for our nature conservation and research programs, ensuring that evidence-based conservation management and support for environmental program delivery occurs across the state. Mark has a very extensive background in wildlife research, biodiversity, and is known to many of us as an outstanding science communicator. Before joining Parks Victoria, Mark was Head of Science at Museums Victoria, where his research background was largely in marine biology, but he's also worked extensively in the establishment of marine protected areas, fisheries research, bird and seal ecology, conservation programs, terrestrial freshwater marine wildlife surveys, media, ecotourism. Mark holds a Bachelor of Science degree in honours in zoology, a DipEd, in biology and environmental science, and also a PhD in zoology from the University of Melbourne. And I've had the great pleasure of knowing and working sometimes distantly, sometimes closely with Mark over the last 25 years. And I know him to be one of Australia's, and I think one of the world's most eloquent communicators for the sea, with a wealth of both personal knowledge, personal experience, and fascinating insights into some of the wonderful creatures that make their home in our waters. From sharing his knowledge of the internal workings of giant squid, look that one up on Google, or the quirky mating behaviours of giant Australian cuttlefish, through to more recently building a shared understanding of the impacts of climate change or bushfires on Victoria's ecosystems. We're privileged to have him sharing some of his stories with us tonight. Mark will be joined during the webinar by some of Parks Victoria's amazing marine rangers that work hard to look after our marine protected area system. Mike Irvine, a ranger team leader at Orbost, will be talking tonight about Beware Reef Marine Sanctuary in Far Eastern Gippsland. Cassie Nolan, Ranger Team Leader in South Gippsland, will be talking to you a little bit about Wilson's Promontory Marine National Park. And finally, Jack Dowson, a Marine Ranger at Queenscliff, will be spending a few moments talking about the Port Phillip Heads Marine National Park. It is, however, now my great pleasure to introduce and hand you over to Dr. Mark Norman and his guests. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mark. And thank you everybody for joining us together on important first step in recognition of our amazing marine protected areas in Victoria and the amazing marine life that live on and off our shores. So what I'd like to do tonight is firstly pay my deep respects to the traditional owners for the lands for which all of you are joining us, and pay my respects, recognise their continuous connection to country, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. Sea country is incredibly important to the many nations that are across the Victorian coast. Now tonight we've got many stories to tell you in coming months as we build towards the anniversary of the 20 years of marine protected areas in Victoria. But tonight I want us to just concentrate on the kind of love and connection to how wonderful these places and creatures are. So this is really about how amazing they are, how precious they are, how vulnerable they are. And in subsequent talks, we'll talk a lot about issues like impacts of climate change or how we can help systems from marine pest and weed pressures, other issues, the sort of research, monitoring, the volunteer work, the friends groups. We'll talk about these things in coming months, but I'd just like to take us today on a voyage across the Victorian coastline. So I'll just share my screen, and I'm hoping that everybody's got a picture of not the Great Barrier Reef. And I'd like to start by saying we have wondrous creatures and not all the good stuff is somewhere else. So tonight we're going to walk, swim, dive across Victoria, across the amazing array of marine protected areas that we have that were established 20 years ago to really fully protect representatives of the diverse habitats and species that occur in Victorian waters. So we're going to get in a kind of conceptual flying yellow submarine, and we're going to dip in and out of the water, starting in the east over near Mallacoota on the New South Wales border. And we're going to work our way along this coastline and bring some of our marine rangers and experienced rangers in this marine space into the conversation. So I'm going to start with Gabo Island and the far eastern tip of Victoria. So this is where we have Cape Howe. So the little dint you can see in the end of that beach is the actual tip of Cape Howe. And this is where Cape Howe Marine National Park is. So part of the voyage today is us starting on the edges of the deep water in the east, and we'll finish on the edges of the deep water in the west. So to sort of recognise this, we have to also recognise that this faces south, our coastline. It's cool, it's often very rough, and it really is facing all the way to Antarctica. So when those southwest swell come in, they really hit these systems hard. And you see this underwater. So this is underwater at Cape Howe National Park, and it's low rock substrates covered in sponges and corals and all sorts of creatures that are gripping on hard in that surge zone. And the fish are adapted to it, and they slide back and forth in this high swell, even down at quite severe depths. You can get moved back and forth quite a long way over these rocky sort of surfaces. So it's a very scoured landscape. But as I said, it's right next to the deep water, and in some ways the most exciting creatures that live in this region, adjacent to a drop-off that drops off to about 4 kilometres deep, is the creatures that swim through. So we've seen pods of 9 sperm whales on this kind of coastline or going through these waters. We've got ocean travelling jellyfish like this comb jelly. So if you think of normal jellyfish, they pump with a sort of a pulsing motion. Comb jellies are a completely different group that have these rainbow coloured little rows of hairs down the side, and when they beat, it's like little conveyor belts driving them through the water, and they're filter feeders. So these are creatures that are swimming through our oceans, in the blue water of our oceans, and if this photo wasn't taken at night, you wouldn't see it against the blue water in the background. It's also where some of the prettiest of ocean travellers come in. This is the paper Nautilus or Argonaut shell. It's a really prized treasure to be found on a beach washed ashore, and on both Gabo Island and the beaches of Kurrajingalong National Park, these shells sometimes turn up in low numbers and have at times turned up in their tens of thousands, so it looked like a foamy oil spill right across the coast from the air. Now, this shell is a beautiful brittle shell, and what's little known is that it's made by a female octopus who swims in open ocean. She's pelagic for her whole life, swimming in open ocean with air trapped in that shell, and she's using it to raise her eggs within. She can build this shell and repair this shell. There's reports of them making a new shell in 2 hours, and the whole system is about having enough air to hold your body weight and suspend the eggs inside. The male's about the size of a jelly bean. She's about the size of a football. And he spends his life hoping to bump into a female, break off his reproductive arm, die in a sort of kamikaze sex, and then she can have up to 36 male arms in her gill cavity ready to give her sperm when she needs to lay her eggs. So absolutely foreign, bizarre, amazing lifestyle, so different to kind of our upright, naked primate sort of existence on land. As we move along this coastline, so we're coming from Malakuta and Malakuta Inlet, Gabo Island, we come along the shorelines, we come past Point Hicks Lighthouse and Whaleback Rock off Point Hicks, and we come to wondrous Cape Conran. And I'm going to hand over to Ranger Team Leader Mike Irvine, who's based down at Cape Conran, as has spent many years in this part of the world. So over to you, Mike.
Yeah, thanks very much, Mark. I'm going to talk about Beware Reef Marine Sanctuary, which is about 4 k's offshore from Conran, so it's not connected to the land. I think Mark got an overhead shot there to show us. There we go. So Beware Reef Marine Sanctuary is an amazing place. It comes up from 30 metres depth, so it's surrounded by sand. The rock that you can see in the photo only comes out of the water by about 1 metre or 2, so if you can imagine high tides and a really big swell, it just disappears under white water, hence the name Beware Reef. So the granite outcrop actually extends, although it's 70 metres length above the water, it goes for about 1 kilometre underwater out to the southeast in a series of drop-offs and gutters and bommies and so on. There's 3 shipwrecks out there from the late 1800s, which are mostly collapsed these days, but still pretty spectacular to swim around. There's a large group of seals that hang out there. They don't breed on the rock, obviously, but they use it as a haul-out zone. So they're really inquisitive and fantastic when you're diving there. So if we plunge underwater, thanks, Mark. The marine life out at Beware Reef is a mix of cold water, cool water, temperate water, and the EAC, the East Australian Current, sort of licks around the corner of Victoria, around Cape Howe, and meets this area. So we get a real mix of species, and quite often some visitors from further up the coast, even tropical sea snakes and tropical dolphin species that come down now and then with really strong warm currents. What you can see in the photo there is one of my favourite features of diving at Beware Reef. Once you get below about sort of 12, 15 metres and the giant kelp forests start to disappear, the sponge gardens appear and go all the way down to the bottom. The sponge gardens are amazing because it's like some gardener has gone berserk and just crammed their garden full of way too many species and colours and all the rest of it, although pretty much everything you're seeing in this shot and in those sponge gardens are animals, not plants. So a specky place to dive. Next slide, thanks, Mark. Like I mentioned before, the shipwrecks out at Beware Reef, 3 of them from the late 1800s, provide great structure to dive around and habitat for the incredible fish species and sponges and corals, ascidians, that grow in amazing numbers and incredibly diverse out on the reef there. The next shot, yeah, thanks, Mark. People, when they're diving in Victoria, or they think of what it's like diving in Victoria, just think of cold, dark, grey, and you can't see very far, and there's not much down there. But the opposite's true. There's so many different species of fish and other animals, especially the inverts, that it's a really good place to dive. So we've got very active volunteers, community divers, plus parks divers and contractors that all do work out at Beware Reef through various times of the year. Got another one there for us, Mark.
I think the last one's going to the sea tulip story. So
the sea tulips, yeah. So when you're diving at Beware Reef, we're doing all sorts of things out there, from surveys to photography, video, to try and share the experience with other people, whether they're divers or not. And it's not uncommon to be swimming around and you'll feel something brush past your shoulder and a seal will be poking over your shoulder. Hence the photo in my behind me there is one of those occasions. So yeah, just a spectacular place to dive and really rich with many different animals. So yeah, thanks very much, Mark.
Thanks heaps, Mike, and both Mike, other park staff, and the Friends of Beware Reef have been an amazing group led by people like Don Love over the years, who've just documented the huge diversity there and been real champions for intervening to stop urchins eating out kelp reefs. So we'll hear more about that in future seminars. There is one thing I wanted to say, that when Mike talks about the colour and the diversity there, on land when you see lots of colours, it's often about attracting insects or birds to come and pollinate. Underwater, it's very different. The colours are often about being poisonous. And so a good example of that is these sea tulips. So these are sea squirts, like the Kunjavoy sea squirts that you get on the rocks around rocky shores. You squeeze them and a jet of water comes out. These are a special sea squirt that lives on a stalk to get up where the water's good for filter feeding, for sucking the food out of the passing water. But they're pretty good to eat, and so they've come up with an arrangement that a poisonous purple sponge brings its chemical arsenal and lives in symbiosis on the outside of these sea tulips, and these can get up to 1/2 metre tall. They're really big animals on stalks, but they've evolved this sort of shared story with the sponges, where the sponges also join them up above the crowd to get access to the best passing water and the food. So colour underwater is often an indication of poison and beware and do not eat, so it's appropriate to mention it at Beware Reef. All right, thank you, Mike. So as we move along the coast, our yellow submarine's come out of the water and is now a yellow aeroplane flying along the coast. We reached the Gippsland Lakes and the amazing 90-mile beach that extends 90 miles and more along the way towards Wilson's Promontory. And it's off this coast that we've got the 90-mile Marine National Park. And I just want to sing the praises of sand plains. So to the initial observer swimming or snorkeling during the day, it just looks like endless sand plains. It feels like a desert with nothing in it, but that is really an unfair representation. When you actually get closer and start looking around, you might find the eye of a stingray like this, or the periscoped eye of an octopus, or a pair of eyes from a dumpling squid or a bottle-tail squid, looking out of that sand substrate, seeing what's going on and hiding in that sand during the day or for its entire lifestyle. So a big survey was done through the museum years ago, and they ended up doing 1 square metre of sand in the Bass Strait off 90 Mile Beach, and they found 800 species of tiny invertebrate living in that sand. So it's really rich. It's got lots going on, lots of different creatures going on. And the best time to look around is at night. Now, this is a little dumpling squid about the size of a golf ball. It has a few camouflage tricks. One is to have reversible glue. They use mucus as glue and then acid to disconnect it, and can make a sand coat to camouflage them against the sand if they're disturbed during the day. At night, they've got bacterial organ in their gill cavity which makes light, and they can adjust the light levels So when they swim around at night with a moonlit night, they make just enough light to cancel out their silhouette. They can even adjust for passing clouds. They adjust a shutter of skin back and forth over the bacteria that are giving off the light, and that hides them from animals like flathead fishes that are underneath waiting for something edible to swim over the top of them. So little dumpling squids, beautiful animals. Other residents of these sand plains are the sand swimmer crabs. Sometimes you only see a pair of eyes or two pairs of eyes if they've recently mated like these ones. And they're watching out for the periscoped octopus, the one that stuck its eye up to see if we were passing. This is the southern keeled octopus, that are very good at grabbing and quickly poisoning, paralysing crabs and slowly eating them. So these are the creatures coming out of these sand plains at night. And they might be giant worm eels, they might be southern sand octopus. These ones do jets of water into the sand that makes liquid quicksand, and then they dive into the soft sand. So this animal's doing jets of water until the sand's really liquefied, and then they just dive on in. So they make their own quicksand to hide in, and then make a mucus chimney to the surface to breathe, to get the fresh water they need for oxygen. The other thing that comes out at night is the shellfish that emerge from the sand. So after dark, they swim up through the sand and then go over the surface of the sand, licking or feeling for prey. Some of them are predatory, some of them are feeding on the mush on top of the sand that settles every day. And some of these are just spectacular animals in bubble shells and sea slugs, all sorts of wonderful creatures. And I just wanted to say that the whole life cycle, almost like a human society, there's the vacuum cleaners that clean up the dirty floor at the end of the day. This is a terror-bellied worm. It sends these little tongues all over the surface of the sand. It hides under the sand, but those tongues go out to lick the surface at the end of every day and bring that food back to a central mouth. So they're sort of doing the vacuuming of the seafloor as well as all those other roles. Now, as we come further west, we get to Wilson's Promontory National Park, the most southern tip of the Australian mainland. And now I'd like to hand over to Cass Nolan, who is our marine ranger, one of our marine rangers at Wilson's Promontory National Park. And over to you, Cassie.
Thanks, Mark. I just want to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands I'm speaking from today and pay my respects to their elders, both past and present. I'm speaking to you from Wilson's Promontory National Park, as Mark just mentioned, and I'm really lucky to be working in this stunning part of the world. What makes this park special for me is that it's quite different to the rest of mainland Australia, and it's actually a lot more like Tasmania. So it's a really special place that has these beautiful green mountain ranges, and it morphs down into this granite, bouldy, rocky areas, and then to white sandy beaches and turquoise blue water. And one of the most well-known, I guess, scenes of the prom is as you're driving into the park, you come around a corner and your vision opens up and you can see our Whiskey Bay, which is one of our marine protected areas. And it takes your breath away every time you see it because of these beautiful colours and these contrasts. No matter how many times you see it, it always takes your breath away. And it's just a stunning landscape. And on those granite areas, you get the vibrant orange lichen that people associate with Tasmania, but we have in the prom here in this special area. It's really beautiful in summer when the light hits the water with those beautiful turquoise colours, but I actually love it as well in winter because you get low-hanging clouds and it becomes quite raw, rugged, quite cold down here, and you can really connect with nature. And in particular, I love this time of year right now, June, because we start seeing some very special animals migrate up past our coast. So I might go to the next slide there, Mark. This photo here was taken this time last year, and those two animals in the water there are southern right whales. So southern right whales were hunted to near extinction and down to approximately 1,000 animals left in the world. They've been protected for a while now and they're back at only about 10,000 animals. So we're super lucky to have them in our water and our protected areas through here. This time last year, I was driving along the beach and I saw this weird black structure thing protruding from the water in the bay. Didn't know what it was at first, kept driving, and I realised it was the pec fin of a whale. Myself and my colleague grabbed our camera and binos, ran down up to the point, and we were just met with this view of this southern right whale mother and her calf, and they were just nursing in our waters. And we got to see this calf was ducking down, nursing from its mother, back up to breathe and just playing around. Watched it for about half an hour, and it was just the most magical experience. And so if it couldn't get any better, we had a pod of dolphins come around the corner and just start interacting with the pair. And you could see the calf just wanted to play. It was trying to get around mum, diving, ducking with the dolphins. Mum didn't want to bar it, and she was trying to block the dolphins. And then we could hear her vocalizing and growling to warn these dolphins off. I can't explain how special that was to hear that vocalization. And then eventually the dolphins got kind of sick of mum fending them off, and they took off, and we got to watch the pair nurse for a while again. And as I've said, it's incredibly special to see that. We have a few nursing grounds around Victoria, so to have that pair, we had another pair as well in our waters around that time. We were very lucky to see that. We also get, as they migrate from Antarctica up to the northern part of Australia and the South Pacific Islands, we have a few different species tracking along that route, so we call it a bit of a whale highway. And we also have humpback whales. There's one here, beautiful photo. And they're always a crowd pleaser, crowd favourite, always breaching, peck slapping, tail lobbing, always having messing around, fun antics. They're just a beautiful whale to see. And we also get animals like orca and other cetacean whale species this time of year. It's really a truly great time of year to be around. Similar to these guys, we have other marine mammals in our space. So we're home to one of the largest breeding colonies of the Australian fur seal on Gabo Island, one of the islands just south of the Prom. The beautiful photo of them there. Similarly, these seals were also hunted to dwindling numbers, but they've been protected for a long time now as well and are bouncing back. And they're also really playful creatures. We love our marine animals. And if you're out on the coastline or in a boat, you can see them playing around, especially when they're pupping, diving in and out of the water, putting their fins in the air, acting like sharks sometimes with their fins in the air. And that's always a nice scene as well. Not coincidentally, when they are pupping in the summer season, we have greater numbers of white sharks in the area as well. Another protected species that's truly an important part of the ecosystem. And we're lucky to have it to call this area home as well. So it's great to have numbers of white sharks in the area as well. Next slide there for me, Mark. Another one of our beautiful seals. And as you go underwater, I was talking about these granite boulders. So we're connected underwater, as we know, by a land bridge. There used to be a land bridge with Tasmania. And now we have all these granite islands dotted across the Bass Coast. And as you go under some of these beautiful islands now, you get to see these cathedrals of yellow zoanthid corals. And that's on our next slide here. And as Mark mentioned about our colours we have down in Victoria, these corals are just a stunning vivid yellow, and they just go on for so far, and it's starting to have these underwater cathedrals of these corals. It's a really beautiful sight. Love the colours down here. They definitely rival the Great Barrier Reef if you ever get a chance to go look at them. I think I'll pass back to you there, Mark.
Thanks, Cassie. And yeah, the underwater granite seascapes are just spectacular, especially when they're kind of covered or coated in these amazing animals that are all trapping the nutrients and the plankton and the small food particles out of the current as the water drifts past. Thanks very much. So in places like Skull Rock, at Wilson's Promontory as well, the undersea components can be very, very dramatic, as much as dramatic as those above water. All right, we're going to take off again in our flying yellow submarine plane and head more towards Inverloch, Cape Patterson Way. And this is Banarong Marine National Park. So this is a really good park to talk about seaweeds and seagrasses. It's a really good example of the huge diversity of seaweeds that we have in Victoria. We're comparable to the entire Japanese archipelago in terms of the diversity of the seaweeds we've got. And they come in all sorts of shapes and sizes, are spectacular plants, and researchers come to look at these species and document them. And it's one of the rich parts of our cold temperate Southern Australian sort of marine life, is this seaweed diversity. These are ones that include calcium carbonate in their in their bodies. So if an animal tries to eat it, they're getting a mouthful of grit. And even the one on the right is another one of these calcified red seaweeds. But the forms can be dazzling. They're beautiful forms in these systems. This is a zigzag group of brown kelps called Cystophora, and they all have that characteristic zigzag pattern. But when you look in amongst these seaweeds, there's also that huge diversity of species there. So beautiful shells that feed on either the creatures on top of the seaweeds or the seaweeds themselves. And sometimes when you're looking hard, if you stay there long enough, you actually realise you're not looking at seaweed, you're actually looking at a weed fish that is fully evolved to live in kelp and even has the little holes in its pectoral fins that mimic the dappled light of the leather kelp that they live in. So there's layer upon layer upon layer in this system of amazing creatures. Now we're getting up higher in our yellow submarine plane and we're flying over Western Port. We won't spend a long time in Western Port, but the mud flats and the silt habitats and the sand substrates of places like Churchill Island or French Island or Mushroom Reef is where we get amazing seagrass beds and our weedy or common sea dragon, Victoria's faunal marine emblem. Wonderful creatures in that system, all using that long straw to suck up small shrimp. But we also get amazing creatures like elephant fish. So these are a primitive group of sort of shark relatives, and they occur in Western Port, and they do a very special thing where they bury their eggs. This is an egg case from an elephant fish, and they bury them in the sand or mud just below the surface. And a baby will take a year to develop within that egg case and eventually split out one end and swim off to hide amongst the weed until they get big enough and strong enough to fend for themselves. But the snoz at the front is like a metal detector for animals, and they push through sand and mud to find buried shellfish, sea urchins, worms, different creatures that are hiding in the sand. Now, we're flying very high to get the satellite shot of Port Phillip, and before I hand over to Jack, I just want to point out that in the top right-hand corner, the little dent that sticks down, we have Ricketts Point Marine Sanctuary. So we have a number of marine parks and sanctuaries around Port Phillip Bay, but I just wanted to talk a little bit about Ricketts Point Marine Sanctuary. It's a really nice place to look carefully at the little things. So there's a lot of life there. There's corals there that could be hundreds of years old. They've never been aged. But when you think hard corals, you don't think Victoria, but we've got them right offshore at Ricketts Point. We've got gutters with Port Jackson sharks in them. So this is another primitive shark that lays an egg case that looks like a spiral piece of brown pasta. And their young grow up in those egg cases. They wash up on shore as well. But even when you look in under the little ledges in this sort of quite sheltered site, you'll find little fish like the southern gobbleguts. This is an unhappy father because they don't eat for 2 months while their young develop in their mouth. So it's a mouth-brooding cardinal fish, effectively. And you can see the eyeballs of the babies on the way, and he's just waiting for them to leave home so he can have a meal again. So there's a lot of that male raising of the young in marine systems. All the sea dragons, seahorses and pipefish, all of them raise the children. So there's lots of different lifestyles and approaches. But even on the smaller scales, the little weed shrimps, the glass shrimps, the pygmy squid that can be only 10 millimetres long with reversible glue like the sand coat of the dumpling squid on the top of the body. And that's how they glue on the underneath of a seagrass frond and wait to nail passing shrimps. So you can see these if you hang around in a seagrass bed long enough. And really colourful anemones. Again, when you see bright colours, you know there's something stinging or bad in there. So this is about stinging cells like jellyfish to ward off any attackers. And it gets us back to that theme of colour means danger, leave me alone. And that's in lots of different places. So this is the Doughboy Scallop, which is very edible, but it's got an arrangement again with a sponge species, a colony of animals that lives on its outside, is poisonous to eat, and all those blue dots are eyeballs looking for a predator who's trying to eat the lips of this scallop. And so as soon as they see something coming, the eyes see it and it clams shut, and then the whole thing is surrounded in poisonous sponge. Now, some animals have specialised on eating the poisonous ones, the poisonous sponges or the poisonous corals. And they're groups like these sea slugs, nudibranchs, because they've got a nude gill or nude branch on their back. And they're actually incorporating the poisons of their food and putting the poison back into the colourful parts of their body. So those spots are advertising that they're poisonous to eat. So it's a good use of that colour. And the sea slugs, often called the butterflies of the sea, are the most amazing shapes and sizes. The museum did a book years ago with like 400 local species, and it's just a spectacular array of creatures. And their stories are infinite. So this is a solar powered one. They're all lobes of the stomach. The little brown dots are plant cells that the slug provides a safe stomach to live in, and the plants just happily photosynthesize and produce sugar. So most of the diet of this slug is actually sugar from the plants, and it just moves around to a sunny bit and takes it easy. So we've had solar powered slugs probably on Earth for several 100 million years. It's a good model and it works really well. So we could learn from a lot of these supposed low life forms. As we leave Ricketts Point Sanctuary and swing down the eastern side of Port Phillip Bay, we might go past the spider crabs, and they're around at the moment. Apparently they've come in recently, and they mass in large numbers to do a mass molting. They take off their hard armour, squeeze out the back, pump up their soft new body to a bigger size, wait till they harden, and then run off back into deeper water. And by being so many in one place, there's too much to eat and nobody can survive it all. So it's an amazing experience. It happens in lots of places around Port Phillip and Bass Strait, and there's nothing more exciting than being in the group as they crawl over you, unless you're an arachnophobe. So I'm going to hand over now to another one of our marine rangers, Jack Dowson, and he's going to talk to us about Port Phillip Heads Marine National Park. Welcome, Jack.
Thanks, Mark. Port Phillip Heads Marine National Park is a really unique and diverse network. It's actually a network of 6 different sections to create one marine national park. And it's located at the southern end of Port Phillip Bay, as you see here, and you've got that entrance into Bass Strait. And on the left there, you've got Point Lonsdale, and on the right, you have Point Nepean. And at these places, you have beautiful intertidal rock platforms, which create a beautiful home for diverse range of algae and invertebrates like snails. And below the water, in between here, in between these 2 points, is actually old Yarra riverbed. When the sea was a lot lower, the Yarra used to flow here and off down towards Tasmania. But now it creates a really complex reef system, and you've got vertical walls, you've got caves and overhangs. Can get up to, there's a vertical wall here with the beautiful colour on it. And it can get up to 90 metres deep. And it's a small opening to the bay, about 3 kilometres long, and you've got about 25 cubic kilometres of water in the bay. And as the tide flows out and flows in, the pressure of that water, all trying to rush through this one small opening, creates a really, really turbulent and strong tidal flow, which can reach 7 knots on a good day, even 9 knots in extreme conditions, which is about 17 kilometres an hour. And if you pair this with strong winds, big swells, it can create a really, really gnarly patch of water. But often on slack water, you get great diving conditions. There's a lot of protection from all the land around it. So it's regularly calm and flat as well, and it can just change in an instant. As soon as that tide changes, those standing waves in that rip area can be really, really big. But this flow supports a really amazing diversity of marine fauna and flora. The next section, we have a Pope's Eye, which is an artificial structure. We also have Portsea Hole, which is an old section of the Yarra River, about 30 metres deep. And both of these places are really, really rich in fish life and create amazing diving conditions. And every time you go, there's just fish galore. Another section of Port Phillip Heads Marine National Park is Swan Bay, which is a shallow embayment full of seagrass. It's only about 1 metre deep the whole way around, but it provides a really important habitat for juvenile fish and invertebrates, which can then, be in the habitat of the seagrass, and then as they grow up, they might leave Swan Bay into the deeper waters, the rocky reefs and the kelp forests that we have in surrounding waters. And last but not least is mud islands, which used to be a cluster of sand islands. There was 3 of them with a few entrances to an internal lagoon, but this it's located on a dynamic a sand plain, sand delta that with all this flow, the sand moves around a lot, and it's actually a shape like a horseshoe shape at the moment, and it's got one opening at the top, and there's a lagoon inside with seagrass all through it. And this island is really important habitat for a large number of bird species, and it's a listed Ramsar site. Every time I visit the park, each one of these sectors, whether above the water, on the water, or under the water, it's really special. You're always seeing something new. It's so diverse. The weather changes like crazy. It can be beautiful like one half hour, and then next half hour it is wild and pretty treacherous. And you often run into amazing wildlife like Australian fur seals, and we've got a beautiful group of dolphins in the bay. But one memory I always think about is I was diving inside the bay. About 18 metres deep. I was scuba diving, and it was beautiful conditions, really clear, on a site called Point Lonsdale Wall. And it's a site with exactly like this, with huge vertical walls and caves, drop-offs, overhangs, and you've got this beautiful, rich diversity of sponges and corals and lots of colour, lots of fish life. And then on top of these overhangs, you've got beautiful kelp beds as well. And as I was swimming out of one of these to go check out the next one, I found myself, we'll go to the tuna slide, Mark, to give a visualization. I found myself just swimming to the next one, and the light disappeared from over me, and there was a big shadow cast over me. And as I look up, I see hundreds and hundreds of schooling fish, just like the ones you see here. And they were southern bluefin tuna, and I had a complete 360-degree vortex of these fish swirling around me, and it was amazing. There's hundreds of these fish that they were about the size of a really well-fed Labrador. They were probably up to 30 kilos, and they just took my breath away. They were just swirling around me, checking me out, and just creating this big vortex cyclone whirlwind around me. And they stayed there for maybe a couple of minutes and then swam off. But I was just blown away. They're torpedo shaped. They're so hydrodynamic, powerful, always on the move. Really great predators. They love eating small balls of bait fish. They feed in big schools like this. What amazes me the most is these were the size of a big dog, but they can grow to 2.5 meters long and 3.5 times my body weight. I'm about 80 kilos. They can get absolutely massive. And although this was an amazing experience, I love running into cuttlefish, which are one of my favourite creatures, much like the dumpling squid that Mark was talking about before. They have an amazing ability to not only change the colour of their skin, but they can change the texture of their skin, like you see this one doing here. And that's they're incredibly intelligent. If they're in a bit of kelp, they might mimic the kelp, like they're mimicking the seaweed in the background there, or they might mimic a rocky reef. But they also use it in use this ability to communicate when breeding and with prey and predators. They're absolutely incredible creatures, and they're really inquisitive. I often run into them. There was one time I was diving in Point Lonsdale again on a night dive. It was pitch black and I didn't see it until my torch came across and like spotted it right there in front of me, and it didn't get startled. It actually was really intrigued with me and came swimming up to me, playing chasey. It would come up to my face and swim away again. I played with it for about 5 minutes. It was swimming all around me between my legs. Absolutely love these wild, wacky creatures. yeah, really fun. And yeah, we've got just an amazing diversity of creatures in Port Phillip Heads Marine National Park.
I'll just go back to these for you, Jack.
Thanks. Yeah, this is another creature you might find almost every dive if you're deep enough. They love a beautiful character in the overhangs, and they love staying in the cracks and crevices and caves, and they just hang out there looking grumpy with that big frown they've got on all the time. But they absolutely glow. If you shine your torch or even just a bit of sunlight hits them, those blue dots on them just really pop, and it's like they're lit up almost. And yeah, the next slide, we've got all this beautiful colour, like those zoanthids in the background, and yeah, lots of pinks, blues, greens. Yeah, we've got it all in Port Phillip Heads Marine National Park. So yeah, thank you, Mark.
Tonight. Thank you very much, Jack. Yeah, great animals, the blue devil and the jewel anemones. I want to talk about that spot is very special because the movement of that water and the nutrient that comes in and out of the bay gets huge jelly swarms, huge bait fish swarms, Australian salmon. One diver in one dive saw Australian salmon eating bait fish, school sharks eating the salmon, the Australian salmon, and then an orca came through and had to go and caught a school shark. He didn't get any of it in the same shot, but he got photos of all of it in the same day. But another one that occasionally swims through our waters is the gigantic leatherback turtles, and they're jellyfish specialists. So you think of them as the cold water turtle that will nest up in northern Australia in the tropics, but spends time down diving for jellyfish, and they end up, you can sometimes at depth get a layer of jellies where they're all feeding on a seam of food or the current's the right way to bring them together, and the leatherback turtles will get in and feed on those jellies as a jellyfish specialist. The other jellyfish specialist in this space is one that divers have seen feeding again on jellies in places like Point Addis Marine National Park. So this is near Bells Beach, the famous surfing spot as we head west along the coast. And they've had sunfish come in and be feeding. So this is ocean sunfish, again, open water, pelagic swimming, kind of blue water species coming to feed on the jellies that are in our cold waters across southern Australia. And these get gigantic. They get to 3/4 of a tonne and can be anything up to 3 metres from tip to tip of that dorsal and anal fin. So their closest relatives are the pufferfish and the toadfish, just amazing creatures. And there was one washed ashore last year along that coast, but they are seen live quite regularly. As we head further west, we go past places like Apollo Bay and the Marengo Reefs Marine Sanctuary. So this is another one just off the shore that's very rich in kelp forests and seaweed diversity, and just a beautiful place to snorkel on a calm day. As we head further west, we get the very recognisable 12 Apostles Marine National Park, but less well known is that those limestone forms continue underwater and the sides of them can be quite dramatic. And in one of the marine sanctuaries and parks in that area is also the Arches Marine Sanctuary that continues those forms underwater. But the sides of these can be incredibly colourful, and I'll show you some of that in a minute. On the top of these, they've got the kelp forest, like I say, and if you're lucky enough, you might see beautiful fish like the rainbow kale, or ugly but not to family members, the warty prowfish, that are ambush predators that sit there hidden most of the time and then leap forward to grab small invertebrates and other species. So there's the hidden and the obvious and just an amazing array of creatures. But when you get down below that seaweed level, this is the sides of some of the rock forms in the Arches Marine National Park, and they're feather corals and gorgonian corals and sponges and just an amazing array of creatures. Further west, we come to Merry Marine Sanctuary in Warrnambool. It's on the left-hand side in this picture, another accessible place that we've done quite a bit of work around rock lobster recovery in this sanctuary. And so you'll hear about that in future presentations in this webinar series. But again, a really accessible, close location for people to go and have a snorkel and see these sorts of creatures. And finally, on our voyage across the coast, we end up at magnificent Discovery Bay. and the Discovery Marine National Park is along this coastline. But we're getting back closer to the drop off of Bass Strait, and we're getting closer to the drop back into deep water. And this is the part of the world where the movement of water masses coming up from Antarctic waters full of nutrients, or those ocean circuits, form the Bonny upwelling, which is an upwelling of nutrients into surface waters, and that forms very large krill swarms, the tiny little Australian krill, like the Antarctic krill, but a different species, and that forms quite large masses of krill swarms that look like pink stains from the air, and they attract the biggest animal that ever lives on Earth, and this is where blue whales come into our part of the world. So animals that over 30 metres long, over 100 feet long, regularly come and feed on Bonny upwelling and move through this part of Victoria. So I'm going to bring our voyage to a close. I wanted to start with deep water and whales and finish with deep water and whales, but I hope we've been able to introduce you to sort of the huge diversity, and this is like 0.01% of what's out there. There's been some estimates of at least 12,000 known marine species in Victorian waters. And we wouldn't, there's so many aspects we don't know about these systems. There's discoveries and observations and weird behaviours coming in every week about this part of the world. So I want people to appreciate how special that marine life is, how special our marine protected areas are 20 years on from their declaration. They were coined to be representative of that richness, and I hope you've got a taste of it today. But it's just, this is our first introduction as a part of our webinar series, and in future talks we want to talk about the work we're doing to understand them better, the work we're doing to protect them from threats, the challenges of climate change, where we can help and do things, where we need to bring the public with us. And I look forward to you joining us in future conversations. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mark, and thank you, Cassie and Mike and Jack, for sharing your incredible stories with us this evening, the amazing stories of the sea. And I think everyone's been blown away by some of the fabulous images that you've been sharing. Hopefully it's inspiring our very large audience. I'll just mention there's over 250 people online live at the moment, and hopefully lots of people. I'm sorry about my phone tweeting or doing whatever it's doing in the background there with all of you making like sounds there. I'll turn that one off. Look, there's a couple of questions that have come in, Mark. I think we've got a couple of minutes that we can probably, for yourself and perhaps for some others. There's actually a question that came in fairly early in the piece. I'm sorry, I've lost the author of the question. I was just quickly looking through the chat to find that person, but you'll know who you are. It's a question for Mike, I think, and probably one for you as well, Mark, that you could add to. Are you seeing tropical species or species from further north in East Gippsland these days? Mike or Mark?
Yeah, there definitely seems to be more appearing. So just recently, there must have been a bit of a warm glut of water come down. So we had several tropical sea snakes, yellow-bellied sea snakes, washed up on the beach near Cape Conran, and also a striped dolphin. I think it's the 4th record for Victoria, and they generally seem to be from up in warmer waters. And one of the issues we have with the water warming up is sea urchins breeding unnaturally. Most of their larvae survive with just a slight increase in water temperatures. So it is, although it's good to see some of these warmer water species, the effects of climate change can be detrimental, and something that we're working on and will be in a future webinar.
What about you, Mark? Have you observed over your time changes in terms of water?
We've got records of 3 green turtles in the bay at the moment, so there are huge issues going on in the sea as much as they are on land. And some of the work that Mike and other teams have been doing to try and protect areas from those sorts of pressures is really important, and you'll hear about it in future talks. But there are records of New South Wales leatherjacket species attempting to breed at places like Pope's Eye in Port Phillip Bay. We're in uncharted waters as much as we are on land, and I think it's important that people appreciate what's going on, and we try and bring those stories to people, but also do everything we can personally to reduce our carbon footprint and our impact on this planet.
Yeah, that's a particularly salient point today, Mark, on World Oceans Day, that we all need to do our individual bit to help look after this incredible ocean planet that we live on, and reducing our carbon footprint is probably one of the very important things that each of us can have a bit of a crack at doing. And the author of that good question was from Kate, so thank you, Kate, for that question. A question from Nick. I think we might know Nick. It's a question I'll put to Cassie and to Jack. What's your favourite place to go diving in Victoria?
Cassie, you go.
I can't pick one. My favourite place around this area is Refuge Cove. It's out on the east coast of the Prom, and it's quite a remote part of the world, and you get some beautiful colours down there. But in saying that, I also love Port Phillip Bay, and even something like Blairgowrie Pier. I just love the colours and the sponge walls down there and the Ascidians. The diversity we have, as Jack was saying, in Port Phillip Bay is incredible and will always hold a place in my heart. How about you, Jack?
It's a hard question. It's a bit like choosing between your children, but the question's been asked. Nick's asked the hard question. Jack, what about yourself?
Mine's definitely Port Lonsdale. I've had extremely, or just in the Rip area. It's just incredibly diverse. I could spend the whole dive under one ledge. There's just so much to see. The longer you spend there, the more you see just looking at this one patch. But you could just keep going and see the big creatures like the seals, dolphins, tuna. You can see everything. But I think Port Lonsdale for sure for me.
Fantastic, great one. Thank you very much. What about you, Mark? I mean, you've been to everywhere in Victoria. I think under the water. You've swum from Mallacoota to Portland, haven't you? One time?
No. Kind of. For me, I think the stories, the places that are most special are where you sit long enough to see what's going on. And it's kind of like being in a forest. You sit down quietly and let the birds come to you. And the stories that just unfold, or the behaviours you see in a hermit crab, in a weird worm, in a fish behaviour. I just think somewhere like Beaumaris, one of the chat questions said, where's a safe place to snorkel? Well, Ricketts Point at Beaumaris is probably our safest, gentlest site to go and have some of these experiences. You'll see zebrafish and snapper and blennies and all sorts of things. Wait for an easterly. So when the wind's from the east and it's blowing offshore, that flattens out the water and makes it clearer. If it's howling from the west, then go down the other side to somewhere like Point Cook or Jawbone Sanctuary if it's a howling northerly. So the beauty of Port Phillip Bay, the wind's always offshore somewhere, and that's what you're looking for to calm it down, and that gets it clearer as well. So I think Port Phillip's really special that way.
Yeah, thanks, Mark, and thank you all for those questions there. Look, we're going to unfortunately have to leave the questions and just do a little bit of a quick wrap up. But look, again, I just want to say very much to our presenters tonight, a huge thank you on behalf of our audience. The comments that are coming through are nothing but flattering and outstanding and all sorts of wonderful things there. So I'll let you read the comments. I'll send you through a transcript of the chat a little bit later on. But look, as far as tonight's concerned, it is really a springboard to thinking about our 20th anniversary for Marine National Parks, and it is World Oceans Day, so lots of things to think about. But over the coming months, we're really going to be putting a lot of effort into sharing information, sharing our stories, providing you with experiences to really get in and explore some of our magnificent marine protected areas here in Victoria. The best way for you to stay in touch with us is to and stay in touch with what's going on is to actually check in with our website. So you've all, I hope, found our website at www.parks.vic.gov.au. Quite a number of people have asked if tonight's session's been recorded in the chat, and it certainly has been, and hopefully in the next day or two we'll have that back up there for those people who may have wanted to join us tonight but for one reason or another couldn't. I think this will be a great resource and a great story to take us right through for the remainder of the year and into the future. On our website landing page for the Marine National Parks 20th anniversary, you'll find links to the individual parks across the state. So if you're looking for maps, you're looking for information about what's there, you're looking for some of our community groups have got divers guides that they've developed, places like Beware Reef or Port Phillip Heads we've just been talking about. Those sorts of resources are available on the individual park pages across the site. We'll also be running, as Mark's mentioned a couple of times, monthly webinars, and when we send out some follow-up information from tonight's session, we'll provide you with details on how to register for those. But we'll be looking at a deeper dive into habitat, species, some of the issues we've talked about touched on tonight, such as climate change issues, some of the challenges around things like sea urchins, but you'll also get a good chance to meet not only some of our other Parks Victoria staff who are working in this space to help look after the parks, but also some of our community champions. In October, we're looking for a special session with volunteers who are doing amazing things in looking at the coast. We're developing videos at the moment on many of the parks that we've talked about tonight, and again, keep checking into the Parks Victoria's website to have a look at what's new. We'll be certainly uploading those to both our website but also through social media, so please do connect with us. There is, if you look at the bottom of the Park Victoria website pages, there is a connect with us, and if you'd like to be involved and get information about not only marine work but the other great work that's happening across Victoria in the park space, please do. Lots of opportunities also to get involved personally and get out there. There will be community groups running events as we get closer to November, celebrating their own birthdays, as well as the amazing achievement of 20 years of marine national parks here in Victoria. So just in closing then, I just want to make sure that that you're aware of the fact that we do have lots more information there. We do have lots more to come, and for the rest of the year, it's going to be a fantastic journey of sharing our marine protected areas with you all. Thanks again to Mark, to Mike, and to Cassie and Jack for their wonderful stories. Thanks to the behind the scenes people that have been pressing the buttons and making sure that everything works well, letting you in the room for a start. So big shout out to Steph Zillies, to Natalie Babick, Louisa James and Felicity Irwin and their comms team, who have done an amazing amount of work and producing some of the incredible stuff that we are seeing. And most importantly, thank you for joining us this evening. It is, you know, it's great to have stories, but you need an audience to actually tell the stories too. So without you, we wouldn't be able to do what we've been able to do tonight. But more importantly, your interest, your passion for the underwater environments of Victoria are clearly why you're here tonight. You've got a job to do too, and that's to share the love. And that's sharing the love with your friends, share the love with your family, share the love with your work colleagues, etc. Tell them what you've seen tonight. Go out and find out for yourself what an amazing place Victoria's underwater world is, and how lucky we are to have an incredible marine national park system, a fully protected system across the state to look after it from now on into the future. Every day is Oceans Day. Let's do what we can to make sure that we look after our ocean planet. So thanks all for joining us tonight.
Thanks heaps, Mark.